There is a sound a man never forgets, and I have spent 30 years trying. It is the sound of a child's breath held too long in the dark, the small wet click in the throat when fear has stolen even the courage to cry. I heard it once, pressed flat against cold clay 6 feet under my own land, with a stranger's hand gripping mine so hard the bones ground together, and a column of men above us close enough that I could smell their horses. People come through this country now on the railroad, and they look out at the dry washes and the broken hills and they see nothing. Empty land, they say. Nothing happened here. Something happened here. I am an old man telling it badly, the way old men do, circling the thing before we land on it. But stay with me. There is a tunnel under what used to be my father's homestead, and what walked through it one night in the autumn of 1882 changed everything I believed about who deserves to live and who decides. I did not understand it then. I am not sure I understand it now, but I have never stopped being grateful that my hands shook too much to do the wrong thing. This is how it began. The first I knew of trouble was the dogs going wrong. It was past midnight and I was in the lower barn with a colt that had colicked, walking him in slow circles by lantern, half asleep on my feet. We had 2 dogs then, old Bridget, a brindle bitch with one cloudy eye, and a younger blue heeler my brother had named Sergeant before he died. The 2 of them slept on the porch most nights and barked at coyotes, at owls, at the moon if the moon offended them. Honest noise. The kind of noise that means nothing. This was not that. They went quiet first. That's the part nobody tells you. Before a dog barks at real danger, it stops. Bridget came off the porch and stood in the yard with her hackles up and her tail low and stiff, and she did not make a sound, and that silence walked up my spine like cold water. I left the colt. I left the lantern, which was the smartest thing I did all night, and I came out into the dark with the rifle I keep oiled and useless against the barn door. The night was enormous. There is no other word. Out here when the moon is down, the sky comes all the way to the ground, and the stars are not pretty, they are a weight, and a man feels how small he is in a way that town people never have to feel. I stood in my own yard and I could not see 20 feet, and I knew, the way you know a thing in your stomach before your head agrees to it, that I was not alone. I want to be honest about who I was. My name is Eli Hargrove. I was 31 that autumn, unmarried, working 160 acres my father had broken with his own back and his own grief, after my mother and my brother both went into the ground within a year of each other. I was not a brave man. I was not a good shot. I had a habit my father used to mock me for, which was that when I was frightened I counted things, fence posts, cattle, the beats of my own heart, as though if I could number the world I could hold it still. I was counting then, 3 breaths, 4. The dog's white eye turned toward the eastern wash and held. And then she was simply there. I did not see her cross the yard. One moment the dark by the well was only dark, and the next it had a shape in it, low and quick, and Bridget. Old Bridget, who would bite a stranger's hand off, Bridget went to her with her tail down and her ears flat, and pressed her gray muzzle into the woman's leg like she was asking forgiveness for something. "Don't," the woman said, to the dog I thought at first. Then I understood she meant me because I had raised the rifle without deciding to. "Don't," she said again in English, low and flat and very tired, and she stepped where the starlight could find her face. She was Apache. I knew it the way you know weather. She wore a man's shirt much too big for her and a skirt sewn from trade cloth gone the color of dust, and her feet were wrapped in hide that had worn through at one heel so I could see the dark of her soul. She was not old. It was hard to say, the desert ages a face and then stops, holds it for 40 years, but she was younger than the exhaustion on her made her look, and she was not alone. There was a bundle against her chest, held in the cross of one arm, and the bundle moved, and I heard it then for the first time, that small held breath, the click in a child's throat. I should tell you what the country was, that autumn, so you understand what walking into a white man's yard cost her. Geronimo had broken out of the San Carlos reservation that spring, him and Nate and a few dozen others, and the whole of the territory had gone half mad with it. Every newspaper in Tucson and Tombstone ran columns of blood, some of it true and most of it sold by the inch. The army was everywhere and useless. The militias were worse, men who would shoot at anything brown and call it patriotism, men who had learned that the bounty paid the same for a woman's scalp as a warrior's, and better for a child's, because a child meant the line ended there. I had heard those men talk in the saloon at Bowie. I had said nothing. I want that on the record too, that I had said nothing, and had told myself that saying nothing was the same as being clean. So when an Apache woman walked into my yard at midnight with a child against her chest, every law and every fear and every loud, ugly voice of that country said one thing to me. This is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to you, and there will be men coming for what she is. And there were. I could already hear them. Far off east, the wash, the sound that the dogs had heard before I could, the soft, confused thunder of shod horses moving in the dark by men who did not know the ground. "They are behind me," she said. She had seen me hear it. Half a day I had on them. Now she tipped her head, the smallest motion, listening, and something in her face folded. Now an hour, less. "Why here?" I said. My voice came out wrong, cracked. "Why my place?" She looked at me a long moment, and I have thought about that look every year of my life since. It was not pleading. I have seen pleading before and after, and this was not it. It was the look of someone laying down a thing too heavy to carry one more step and not caring any more where it lands. "Your father," she said. I felt the ground move. "What about my father?" "Long ago." Her arm shifted, the bundle settled, the breath clicked. "Before the wars came so bad, a man dug a well on this land and the digging broke into a soft place, a hollow under the rock, water cut old. He did not fill it. He made it a thing, a way down, a way out in case the bad came. He did not tell the soldiers. He did not tell the town." Her eyes did not leave my face. "He told a girl who brought him a basket of pinion to trade, who spoke a little of his tongue, and he showed her the door of it in the bank of the dry wash where no one would look, and he said, 'If it ever comes for you, the door is here.' I was 11 years old. He gave me dried apples. I have not forgotten the apples. I stood in my yard with a rifle I could not have fired, and the bottom dropped out of every certainty I owned. Because I knew about the hollow. Of course I knew. My father had shown me the inside of it when I was a boy, the cellar door behind the false back of the root cellar, the crawl that opened into a chamber the size of a small church, dry and cold, with a passage that ran 100 yards underground and came out in the bank of the eastern wash behind a screen of brush, and a slab of rock you could pull across the mouth from inside. He had called it the go-down. He had made me swear never to speak of it, and I had thought it was an old man's fear, a relic of the early years when the Comanche still raided this far, and I had been faintly ashamed of it, the way a son is ashamed of the soft, fearful parts of his father. I had never once thought to ask why my father, a man who hated and feared the Apache as much as any settler I knew, would have shown the secret heart of his land to an Apache child for the price of a basket of nuts. I think about that often. I think a man can hate a people and still be unable to refuse a hungry, 11-year-old dried apples and a kindness. I think most of the cruelty in the world lives in the gap between those two things, and most of the grace does too. "He is gone," I said. "My father 3 years. "I know," she said. "I have watched this place. I did not come before because I had nowhere I needed to come to. Now I do." And she looked down at the bundle and back at me, and she said the thing that broke it open. "He is not mine. The boy. His mother was my sister. She is dead at Sibque 4 days ago, and the men who killed her are the men in the wash, and they are paid by the head, and I am all that is between him and the going rate." Her voice did not break. That was the worst of it. "I am asking for the door. That is all. Show me the door and I will take him down, and you will never see us, and you can tell them you saw nothing and it will be true because you will close your eyes." The horses in the wash were closer. I want to describe to you exactly what was in me in that moment, because I have spent my life trying to be honest about it, and most men in my place lie. There was fear, simple and total, the animal fear of dying for someone else's trouble. There was the law, which said harboring and meant prison or worse if the militia found her under my land. There was the long cowardice of having said nothing in the saloon, which wanted very badly to keep on being nothing, to wave her toward the wash and stay clean and stay alive. And there was something else underneath all of it that I did not have a name for then. The boy's breath, maybe, the click in his throat. The fact that my father, my hard, frightened, grieving father, had stood on this same dirt 20 years before and decided that a child's hunger mattered more than a child's blood, and had built a secret into the earth on the strength of that decision, and had handed it down to me without ever explaining it, trusting that when the night came I would understand. I understood. God help me, it took longer than it should have. I stood there counting horses I couldn't see, 4, 6, 8, and the woman watched me decide whether she and the boy would live, and she did not beg. She only waited, with her sister 4 days dead and her feet worn through, and I have never in my life been so ashamed of how slow a good thing came to me. Not the door, I said. Her face closed like a fist. Listen to me. I was already moving, grabbing her sleeve, and she pulled back hard, and I let her go and held up both hands. Listen, the wash door, that's where they'll look. They're coming from the wash. If they cut your sign coming in and lose it, the first thing a tracker does is walk the bank, and that brush won't fool a man who's hunting. Not the wash door, the house, the root cellar. Through the house and down, and you wait, and I send them past, and when they're gone you go out the wash end in the morning with the country between you and them. I was breathing hard. It's farther. It means coming into a white man's house with a white man you don't know. I understand what I'm asking, but it's the difference. Do you hear me? The wash is where you die. The house is where you don't. She stared at me. Behind her the dark was beginning to grain, the first not quite light that comes an hour before dawn, and in it I could finally see her eyes, and what was in them was not trust. I want to be clear. She did not trust me. She had no reason on this earth to trust me, and she didn't, and she came anyway because the alternative was the wash, and the wash was full of men who would pay themselves for her nephew's small skull. If you give us to them, she said quietly, I will have time before they take me to put my knife where your father put his trust. Do you understand me? Yes, I said. Then go. We ran. The house was 40 yards, and it was the longest 40 yards of my life. I went first because I knew the ground, and she came behind with the boy, and Bridget ran with us low and silent, and Sergeant, the healer, had vanished entirely, gone to ground the way a smart dog does when men with guns are abroad. I hit the porch and went through the door and didn't light the lamp. I knew that house blind, every board, every nail that snagged a sleeve. And I led her through the front room past the cold stove and into the lean-to kitchen, and through the low door into the root cellar where the air went suddenly cold and smelled of earth and onions, and the particular dark mineral smell of deep ground. The false back was a panel of plank that looked like shelving. My father had built it well. You had to know to lift, not pull. I lifted. It came away with the soft grind of wood on wood that I had not heard in 3 years, and behind it was the black mouth of the go-down, and out of it breathed the cold of the deep earth, older than the house, older than the territory, older than all the trouble men had brought to this country. The woman stopped. I understood that too. She had run all the way from Sibque to put herself and the child into a hole in a stranger's floor on the word of a man she had known for 10 minutes, a man of the people who were hunting her. The hole was black. It looked like a grave. It looked like exactly what the militia would have made of her anyway, only she'd be walking into this one on her own feet. I saw her weigh it. I saw the whole calculation cross her face in the half-second the cold air touched it. And I will tell you that I have never respected anyone more than I respected her in that half-second, because the math was impossible, and she did it anyway. There's a chamber, I said, fast, low. 20 feet down the crawl, opens up, you can stand, it's dry. There's a passage out the far end, comes up in the wash bank, the door you'd have used, but from the inside where they can't open it. Air's good. I've been down. You wait in the chamber. You don't make a sound. Whatever you hear up here, whatever I have to say to them, you don't make a sound." She looked at the black mouth and then at me. The boy's breath clicked. "Apples," she said. I didn't understand. "He gave me dried apples," she said. "Your father, when I was hungry and not his blood and not his trouble, he did not have to." She stepped to the edge of the dark. "I am telling you this so that if you betray us, you will have to do it knowing what kind of man you came from." And she went down into the earth with the child held to her chest, feet first, careful, swallowed by the dark a few inches at a time, until there was nothing of her left but the small held breath of the boy, growing fainter, and then gone. I set the false back in place. I dragged a sack of seed potatoes against it. I stood up in the cold cellar with my heart going like a fist on a door, and I heard, over the house and very close now, the unmistakable sound of horses coming into my yard, and a man's voice, flat, bored, the voice of a man who has done this many times, calling out, "House, light a lamp and come out slow. We're tracking hostiles and we tracked 'em right to your door." I went up out of the cellar. I lit the lamp with hands that would not stop shaking, and I went to the door to lie, for the first time in my life, to men who could kill me for the lie, with a woman and a child 6 feet under my own kitchen floor holding their breath in the dark. I counted the horses through the window before I touched the latch. I have heard men say that lying is easy, that it comes natural to the worst of us and only the good have to work at it. That is the kind of clean thing people say who have never had to lie with their life on the table. The truth is that lying is the hardest physical labor I have ever done. I sweated through my shirt standing still. My mouth went so dry the words tore coming out. And the whole time, under the floor at the back of the house, 2 people were holding their breath on the strength of how well I could betray everything in my face. I opened the door before they could break it. There is a thing you do, opening a door to armed men, that I learned that night without being taught. You open it wide and you step out into the light yourself, hands loose, so that they see all of you at once and there is nothing left to wonder about. A man who opens a door a crack and peers out has something behind him. I knew that the way I knew the dogs going quiet. So I opened it wide and I stepped out onto my own porch in my nightshirt with the lamp held up in my left hand, and I let them look at all of me, and I prayed they could not see my knees. There were 9 like I'd counted, 8 on horseback in a loose half-circle in my yard, and 1 already down off his horse, standing at the bottom of my porch steps. He was the one who'd called out. I knew him a little. His name was Cobb, Asak Cobb, and he ran cattle south of the Dragoons and had run for sheriff twice and lost, and he had the particular bearing of a man who has decided that the offices that wouldn't have him were beneath him anyway. He was big and going to fat, and he wore a good coat. The men behind him were a worse class of thing entirely. Saddle tramps, 2 of them barely older than boys, one with a face like a hatchet and a string of something dark and shriveled hanging from his saddle horn that I made myself not look at twice. "Hargrove," Cobb said, so he knew me too. "You're up late." "Colicked colt," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to. Counting, somewhere underneath, 1 man down, 8 up, 2 boys, the hatchet face Cobb. "Been walking him since midnight. What's the trouble?" "Trouble?" Cobb smiled without any part of it reaching his eyes. He had a way of repeating your word back to you like he was tasting it for poison. "The trouble, Hargrove, is that we've been on the trail of a buck and a squaw since Sibecue, and the sign brought us straight across your east pasture and into that wash yonder, and then it just stopped." He turned and pointed with his whole arm, lazy, toward the black line of the wash where the first gray of dawn was beginning to find it. "Now sign doesn't stop. Sign goes somewhere. So either they sprouted wings, or somebody on this ground knows where they went." "I've seen nobody," I said. It came out flat and true-sounding, and it was the largest lie I had ever told, and I felt it leave me like blood leaving a wound, the cold light feeling after. The hatchet-faced man spat. "Dogs," he said to nobody. "Where's your dogs, rancher? Man's got dogs out here. They'd barked at us a quarter-mile out. He looked at me with eyes like wet stones. They didn't bark. Why's that? 'Cause they already had something to bark at tonight and they wore it out. My stomach dropped through the porch boards. He was good. The bad ones often are. I had not thought about the dogs. And then old Bridget, God keep her. I will love that dog past my own death. Old Bridget came out from under the porch where she'd gone, and she stood beside my leg, and she growled at the men in the yard. Low and ugly and continuous. The most natural thing in the world. A ranch dog growling at 9 strangers who'd ridden in armed at dawn. "There's your dog," I said, "and she'd be barking still if you give her a reason. You're standing in my yard pointing guns at me, mister, and she don't like it any better than I do." I let an edge come into it. A frightened man who is also angry is more believable than a frightened man who is only frightened, that I did know, from the saloon, from watching men. "I've been up all night with a sick animal worth more than your saddle, and I'd take it kindly if you'd say your piece and ride." Cobb held up a hand. The hatchet man subsided, but his eyes did not leave me, and I understood that I had won nothing with him, only with Cobb, who wanted to be home in his good coat. "We'll have a look around," Cobb said, "not a question." "It's my land." "It's the United States land," Cobb said, "and there's a war on it and the militia's authorized to search where the sign leads. You can stand there and bless us, or you can stand there and not. Spread out," he said over his shoulder. "Barn, smokehouse, that lean-to. Check the soft ground by the well. Buck and a squaw can't carry a baby across rock without leaving something." A baby. So they knew about the boy. I had been telling myself, in the part of my mind that was not lying, that perhaps they only wanted the woman, that perhaps there was some line even these men would not cross. And Cobb said a baby the way he'd say a stray calf, a thing with a price on it, and the last of that comfort went out of me. I thought of the boy's breath in the dark below us. I thought, with a clarity that frightened me, that if it came to it I would do murder on my own porch before I let them down that cellar. And I was not a man who could do murder. I knew I was not. And the knowing and the willing sat in me at the same time and did not cancel, and I have never understood how a man holds 2 such things at once, but I held them. They searched. I want you to live a little of that hour with me, because it was the longest of my life, and I have never been able to make it shorter in the telling. They went through the barn first. I heard the colt scream when one of them got rough with it. They were turning over straw, looking for a person in the straw, and I started off the porch and Cobb said, "Hargrove," once, soft, and I stopped, because there was a child under the floor and I could not afford to be the kind of angry that gets a man shot. So I stood and listened to my colt scream and did nothing, and added it to the long account of things I had stood by for. They went through the smokehouse. They went through the lean-to that I'd built the spring before, throwing my few tools, my saddles, the winter's hams onto the dirt. They walked the soft ground by the well with a lantern, 3 of them bent over like men reading, and I watched the hatchet man find. I saw the moment he found it, the place where the woman's worn hide had pressed a faint half-print into the mud at the well's lip, where she'd stood in my yard 10 feet from where I now stood lying. He crouched over it a long time. "Cobb," he said. Cobb came. They looked at the mud together. My heart was a hammer on an anvil, and I was certain, that the next thing would be the kitchen, the cellar, the false back, the seed potatoes I dragged across it that any fool could see I dragged because the drag marks were fresh in 3 years of dust. "Could be days old," Cobb said. "Could be an hour," the hatchet man said. "Could be his," Cobb said, jerking his chin at me. "He's got feet. Wraps 'em in burlap in the cold like every other broke nester out here." He straightened up with the sound a heavy man makes, a grunt and a hand on the knee. He was tired. That was the thing. Cobb was tired, and his bed was 20 miles off, and a half-print in the mud was thin soup for a man who'd already decided his quarry had crossed the wash and gone into the Malpais where no horse could follow. There's no sign past the wash 'cause it's all rock past the wash. They're in the lava by now and they'll die in the lava and good riddance. And I'm not breaking my horses on basalt for a bounty that'll likely turn out to be coyotes anyhow. They came here, the hatchet man said. He stood up too, and he was looking at the house now, the kitchen lean-to, and his whetstone eyes moved along the base of it the way a snake moves, and I felt them pass across the spot where the cellar was as if they were hands. Folks come everywhere, Cobb said. Doesn't mean they stayed, mount up. I want to see the cellar. The words went into me like a knife going in slow. Cobb sighed. The dawn was real now, gray going to rose along the Chiricahuas to the east, and birds had started somewhere, the indifferent birds, and I stood on my porch and watched the hatchet man decide he wanted to see my cellar, and I understood that I had perhaps one more lie left in me, and that it had better be the best thing I would ever say. There's no cellar, I said. Cobb looked at me. Root cellar off the kitchen, I said. If you want to call a 4-foot hole full of onions a cellar, help yourself. But I'll tell you what's in it, onions, seed potatoes I bedded down yesterday for the winter, and the smell of 3 years of damp, because my father dug it too shallow and it floods every spring and I've been meaning to fill it. I made myself laugh. It was the hardest single thing I did that night, harder than the lie at the door, harder than standing still while the colt screamed. I made myself laugh, a tired man's laugh, a man amused at the idea that fugitives would hide in his flooding onion hole. You think a woman take a baby down into standing water and snakes to wait for you. You'd hear the baby holler from the porch, go look, track mud through my kitchen. But when you don't find anything but potatoes, you're going to feel like a fool, and I'm going to remember it, and so's everybody I tell. It was the everybody I tell that did it. Cobb was a man who had run for office twice. A man like that does not want to be the story told in the saloon at Bowie, the militia captain who tore apart a Nestor's onion cellar at dawn and found onions. The hatchet man did not care about such things. He cared about money and the dark thing on his saddle horn, but Cobb cared, and Cobb was in command, and I had found the soft place in him, the way my father's well had found the soft place in the rock. We're done here, Cobb said. Cobb. We are done, Prout. And there was iron in it now, the iron of a man who has been awake too long and pushed too far by a subordinate he doesn't respect. It's a baby and a squaw in the Malpais, and they'll be dead of thirst by noon, and you can go scalp the bodies if it means that much to you, but I'm not turning over a dirt-poor white man's potatoes on your say-so and answering for it later. Mount up. They mounted up. It took an age. Men gathering reins, a horse that didn't want to be caught, the boys laughing about something low and ugly. The hatchet man, Prout, sat his horse last of all and looked at me and looked at the house and looked at me again, and what was in his face was not satisfied. He knew. I am as sure as I am of anything that Prout knew in the animal part of him that I had something under my floor, but knowing is not finding. And Cobb had spoken, and the bounty would not pay him to defy his captain over a feeling. You're real cool, rancher, Prout said, for a man got pulled off a sick colt at dawn by 9 armed strangers. Real cool. He turned his horse. I'll remember your face. You do that, I said. And they rode out east, toward the wash, toward the Malpais where they thought their quarry had gone to die. The whole 9 of them strung out in the rising light with the dark thing swinging from Prout's saddle. And I stood on my porch and watched them go and counted them out the way I'd counted them in 9, and did not move, did not breathe, did not let one muscle of my face go slack, until the last of them had dropped over the rise and the sound of the horses had thinned to nothing, and then to less than nothing, until there was only the birds and old Bridget leaning warm against my leg, and the rose light coming up over the mountains on a day I had been fairly sure I would not live to see. Then my legs gave out and I sat down hard on my own porch steps and shook like a man with the ague, for I don't know how long. I did not go down to them right away. I want to be honest about why, because the reason does me no credit. Part of it was sense Prout might double back, and a man who's just survived a thing learns to mistrust the survival. But part of it, the larger part, was that I was afraid to go down. Up here on the porch I was a man who had done a brave and decent thing, and I could feel that about myself, could hold it warm. Down there, I would have to face the woman who had watched me decide whether she and the boy would live, who had told me she would put a knife in her own heart before she let them take the child, who did not trust me and had no reason to, and had been proved both wrong and right in the same hour. Down there, it would be real. So I sat on the porch and let the sun come up and told myself I was watching for proof. It was the colt that shamed me back into the house. He was still in distress, and I could hear it, and I am not a man who can listen to an animal suffer, so I went to him first, got him walking again, got the gripe to ease, did the small, honest work of my hands, and somewhere in that work the shaking stopped and I became a person again instead of a survivor, and I knew I could not leave them down there 1 minute longer than I had. I went into the house. I dragged the seed potatoes away. I lifted the false back, and the cold breathed up at me, and I called down into the dark, soft, not knowing the word for what I wanted to say. "They're gone, it's done. They're gone, you can come up." Nothing. I felt the bottom go out of me a second time. I thought the worst, that the air had gone bad, that the boy had. "Speak again," her voice came up, low, close. She was right at the bottom of the crawl. She had been there the whole hour, 20 feet under 9 armed men with a knife in her hand, I had no doubt. "Say it again, the same words." "They're gone," I said. "All 9, rode east toward the Malpais. They think you crossed the wash into the lava. It's done, I swear it on my father, it's done. Come up." There was a silence, and then a sound I will hear when I die, the boy beginning to cry. Just beginning, the held breath finally let go, the long postponed grief of a child who has been silent past all childish endurance, who has felt his mother's fear in the dark for an hour and finally been told it was safe to be afraid out loud. She must have had her hand over his mouth that whole hour. She must have, to keep him silent under those men. I thought about what it costs a person to hold a frightened child silent with her own hand, in the dark, for an hour, knowing what waited if the hand slipped, and I had to put my own hand over my own mouth, kneeling at the edge of that hole, and I do not think any man would think the less of me for it. She came up out of the earth into the light of my kitchen, and she had the boy on her hip, and he was crying into her neck, and she stood there blinking in the gray daylight with her face the color of ash, and she looked at me, and for a moment neither of us could find a single word in any language. Then she said, "The laugh." "What?" "Heard the laugh through the floor when you laughed about the onions." She shifted the boy, and something in her face that had been clenched for 4 days and an hour began very slightly to loosen. "I did not think you would be able to laugh. I thought a man who can lie is one thing, a man who can laugh while he lies with us under his feet." She stopped. She looked at me a long moment. "What is your name? You did not say it. I have hidden my sister's son under the floor of a man whose name I do not know." "Eli," I said. "Eli Hargrove." "Eli." She tried it. The boy hiccuped and went quiet against her neck, exhausted, already half asleep the way children drop straight off a cliff into sleep once safety comes. She put her cheek down against his black hair. And then she told me her name, which I had not asked for and which I have carried 60 years and will not write here, because it was hers to give and not mine to spend. And I will only say that it meant something about water finding its way through stone, and that I have never heard a name fit a person better in my life. We stood in my kitchen in the early light, the 3 of us, and outside the indifferent birds sang, and somewhere east 9 men rode toward an empty lava field, and I thought it was over. I want to set that down plainly so you feel it the way I felt it. I thought the danger was past, and the worst was behind us, and all that was left was to feed them and rest them, and send them off into the Malpais by night with food and a waterskin and my father's old debt paid at last. I did not know about the boy's fever. I did not know about the well. And I did not know, because I had counted them out at 9, that a Sac Cobb's militia had ridden out of Bowie that dawn 10 strong, and that the 10th man had not been in my yard at all. I did not see it at first because a child asleep looks like a child asleep, and I was a bachelor rancher who knew more about the ailments of horses than of children. It was she who knew. She got him onto the pallet I made up by the stove, straw and my own blankets, the best I had, and she put her lips to his forehead the way women do, that old test older than any doctor, and her whole body went still in a way I had learned by then to read as fear. "He is burning," she said. I came and felt him. She was right. The boy was perhaps 2 years old, no more, and under the dirt and the 4 days of running he was hot as a coal, his small chest going too fast, a faint dry rattle in it like the rattle the colt had had a different way. I have thought since that it was the running that did it, the cold nights without fire, the wash water she'd had to drink, the simple murderous labor of being carried across that country by a woman who could not stop to let him rest. He had held silent under the floor for an hour with a fever in him. I had thought that was bravery, the held breath, and it was, but it was also a sick child too weak to fight her hand. "What does he need?" I said. She looked at me, and for the first time since she'd walked into my yard, I watched her come up against something she could not run, could not hide from, could not lie her way past. There is a particular helplessness in a strong person meeting a thing that strength does not answer, and I saw it cross her face, and it frightened me more than Prout had. "Water," she said, "clean, cool, to bring the heat down." And she named some things then, plants in her own tongue and then haltingly in mine, a willow bark she said brought down fever, a root, things that grew along living water. "There is a spring," she said, "where I was going, 2 nights east in the high country where my people, where some are still free. The plants are there. He is there, my mother's brother, who knows the medicine, if I can reach the spring." 2 nights, I said, carrying him, with Cobb's men between here and there. She did not answer. She did not have to. We both did the arithmetic and we both arrived at the same place, which was that a sick child carried 2 nights across that country by an exhausted woman, past 9 armed men, was a child who would die on the way, and that the only thing that had any chance at all was to break the fever here now, and let him gather strength before she ran again. "Then we bring it down here," I said. "The water, I've a good well, cold water, deep, and willow grows in the wash where there's seep, I've seen it, gray leaf stuff down past the bend. I'll go, you stay with him, you can't be seen and I can move in daylight on my own land. Tell me again what to look for." She told me, she made me say it back. And then she caught my wrist. The second time she had touched me, and the first had been to pull away, and she held it and she said, "Why?" I did not understand the question. "Why do this?" she said. "The door I asked for, a debt of your father's I could understand. A man pays his father's debts, but this," she looked down at the boy at his too fast breathing, "this is not a debt. This is a child of the people the men outside would pay you to kill, sick in your house, and you are about to walk out into the day to find him medicine. There is no debt that buys this, so, why?" And I want to tell you that I had some fine answer, something about the brotherhood of man or the eyes of God or the wrongness of the bounty, and the truth is I did not. I stood in my kitchen with her hand on my wrist, and I looked for the answer, and what I found, all I found, was the small dumb fact at the bottom of everything. "He's a baby," I said, "and he's sick, and I've got water." She looked at me a long time, then she let go of my wrist. "Apples," she said again, softer than before, and turned back to the boy, and I understood that I had just been told I was, after all, my father's son, and that this was the highest thing she knew how to say. I went out for the water and the willow with the sun well up and the day gone hot, and that is when I found the 10th man. I had counted them in and counted them out, and the count had been 9, and the count had been right for the yard. What I had not known, what no man on my porch had known, was that a Sacob was a more careful captain than his tiredness made him look, and that he had peeled one rider off before they ever reached my place and set him on the high ground south, on the shoulder of the little mesa that overlooks my whole spread, with a long glass to watch, in case. It is what a man does who has hunted before and been fooled before. You send your 9 to the door, and you put your 10th on the hill, and you let the door tell its lies while the hill tells the truth. I did not see him. I want to be clear that I am not the kind of frontiersman who reads a glint on a distant ridge and knows his danger. I'm a poor shot and a worse scout, and I have said so. I went down to the wash for the willow, openly, a rancher about his morning, and I cut the gray leaf bark she described, and I came back up and drew water cold from the well, 2 buckets, and I carried them into the house in plain view of God and the whole eastern sky. And on that mesa, 2 miles south, the 10th man, I learned his name later and it does not matter, he was young, one of the boys, left behind because he was the most expendable. The 10th man watched a bachelor rancher who lived alone draw 2 full buckets of cold water at mid-morning and carry them into the house, and cut willow bark like a man who'd been told to cut it. And he was young, but he was not a fool, and he turned his horse and rode hard to find Cobb. I knew none of this. I went inside and we worked over the boy. I will not stretch out that afternoon, because it was the simplest and the hardest hours of the whole thing, and there is no use dressing it. We cooled him. She steeped the willow bark and got it into him a few drops at a time off her own finger. We wet cloths in the well water and laid them on him and changed them as they warmed, and he cried. And then he stopped crying, which was worse. And then late in the afternoon, I had given up hope. I will admit it. I had begun in the back of my mind to think about where on my land I would dig. Late in the afternoon he broke into a sweat, a real sweat, soaking, and his breathing eased, and the coal heat of him cooled under our hands to something like a child's ordinary warmth. And he opened his eyes and looked at her and said a word, a small word in their tongue, and she made a sound I had never heard a person make, half a laugh and half a thing that had no name, and pulled him up against her and rocked him, and over the top of his head she looked at me with her face wet and shining, and I had to go out to the porch because some things a man should not watch too close. I stood on the porch in the long gold light of the late afternoon, and I let myself, for one moment, be glad all the way through. The boy would live. She would rest him a day, 2 days, and then I would send them east by night with food and water, and my father's old map of the seeps drawn fresh on the back of a feed bill. And she would reach the spring and her mother's brother and the medicine and the last free country, and the door under my house would have done the thing my father built it to do, and the apples would be paid for, and I would have, for once in my cowardly life, stood on the right side of a thing when standing there could have killed me. I was thinking that, exactly that, with the gold light on the mountains, when I saw the dust. South, the Mesa Road, a column of riders coming hard, and even at that distance, even being the poor scout I am, I did not need to count them to know. The 10th man had watched, and the 10th man had ridden, and Cobb, tired, careful, decided against Cobb, had turned his whole command around in the Malpais on the word of a boy with a glass who'd seen a lone rancher carry 2 buckets of water into a house, and they were coming back, and this time there would be no laughing about onions, because this time they knew. I did not have an hour, I had minutes. Here is the moral weight of it, and I will lay it down plain, because I have circled it for 60 years, and I am too old now to circle anything. There was a choice in front of me, and it was this. I could put them down the go-down again, into the chamber and bolt the false back and meet Cobb at the door a second time. But the lie was dead, the boy had been seen, the willow had been seen. They would tear the house apart board by board this time, and they would find the cellar and the false back with its fresh drag marks, and they would have her and the boy and me, all 3, and the bounty would be paid, and there would be a 4th thing dark and shriveled hanging from Prute's saddle before the week was out, a small one. The chamber was a trap now, the hill had killed it. Or there was the other end, the passage, the 100 yards of crawl that ran underground from the chamber to the washbank, to the door my father built that opened from the inside, behind the brush and the slab of rock, the door I had told her that first night not to use because the wash was where they'd look. But they would not look there now. They would look at the house because the house was where the boy had been carried, where the water had gone, where the 10th man had seen the smoke. They would come at the house from the south, all of them, and the wash lay north and east, and if she could get into the go-down and through the crawl and out the far door while I held them at the house, if I could hold them at the house long enough, be slow at the door, be stupid, be a frightened rancher fumbling a lamp, Anything to buy her the minutes to get 100 yards underground and out the other end and into the broken country to the north, where a woman who knew the ground could lose 9 men and a tenth. Then the route my father dug was not a hiding place. It was a road that ran under the very feet of the men who'd come to kill her, from the trap end to the free end, and I had been thinking of it wrong the whole time, thinking of it as a hole to hide in, when my father had built it as a way through. That is what a secret underground route is. Not a grave you climb into, a road no one else can see. But it cost. Everything costs, and I had learned that much by then. Because for it to work, the men had to believe the house held what they wanted. They had to be sure enough to surround it and breach it and search it down to the foundation stones, and that meant I could not be standing innocent in the yard with my hands up. I had to be a man with something to hide. I had to be guilty enough to hold all 9 of them at my door, fighting the door, breaking the door, while under their boots a woman carried a sleeping child down a road in the dark, toward the only free ground left in the territory. I had to give them a man to catch, so they would not catch her. I went inside. I told her fast all of it, the riders, the count, the choice. I drew her the way through the crawl and spit and ash on the kitchen floor, the turns, the low place where she'd have to drag the boy, the slab at the end, and how to work it. She listened with her whole body. She did not argue. She had run this kind of arithmetic her whole life. She knew at once that it was the only sum that came out with the boy alive. "Come with us," she said, "through the road, all 3. "Somebody's got to be in the house," I said. "Somebody's got to be the reason they stay at the house. If they ride in and find it empty, they'll fan out and cut your sign north before you're a quarter-mile clear. They have to fight for the house. They have to think they've got me cornered with you in here. That's the only thing that buys you the road." I was already moving, taking up my father's rifle, the one I could barely fire. "I'll give them a cornered man. I'll give them the best cornered man you ever saw." She understood. I watched her understand, and I watched her hate it, and I watched her accept it, all in the space of a breath, because there was no time for any of it to be anything but quick. She got the boy. She went to the cellar. At the lip of the dark, the same black mouth she had gone down into not trusting me 12 hours before, she stopped and turned and looked at me, and this time there was trust in it, full and terrible, the worst gift anyone has ever handed me, and she said, "He will know your name. I will teach it to him. Eli. He will know that a white man with water gave him the road. As long as he lives, that will be true, and his children will know it, and his children's children. You have made yourself into a story that will outlive every man riding to this house. Do you understand what you have done?" "Go," I said, "go." And she went down into the earth with the boy for the last time, and this time she did not stop at the chamber. I heard them move past it into the crawl, the long road, the sounds growing faint and then fainter, and I set the false back, and I did not drag the potatoes over it, because I wanted them to find it. I wanted them to spend their fury on an empty hole in the ground while she put the whole length of my father's secret between herself and them. And I went to the front of the house, to the window, and I watched Cobb's column come up out of the south in the long red light, 10 strong now, 10. And I worked the lever of my father's rifle, and I waited to be the most convincing cornered man in the history of the Arizona Territory. I am an old man, and you have come this far with me, and I owe you the end. But the end is not mine to tell entirely, because I did not see the most important part of it, which is the part that happened underground and north of here while I was occupied at the house. I can only tell you what I knew and what I learned, and what I have chosen to believe in the long years since, and I will mark for you which is which. What I knew, that I met them at the house, and that I held them there. I will not make a battle of it because it was not won. I am not that man, I have told you. I fired the rifle twice, high and wild, out the window, the moment they came in range, which is the single most foolish brave thing I have ever done, because nothing in this world says a guilty man is cornered in here like a man firing on a militia. And Cobb's whole command went off their horses and into cover and surrounded that house and settled in to take it, and it ate their whole attention, every eye for the better part of an hour. They shouted for the squaw. They shouted for the buck. They had no idea there was no buck, had never been a buck, only a woman and her sister's son, and the lies of a man who had decided, too late in his life but not too late, what he was for. What I learned later from a freighter who had it from a soldier who had it from the chain of all such things, that 2 days east in the high country, at a spring where willow grows, a woman came in carrying a healthy child, having crossed an impossible country alone, and that she told whoever would listen about a road under the earth and a white man with water, and that the story traveled, the way such stories do, faster and farther than any of the men who would have stopped it. What I have chosen to believe, that the boy lived to be a man, that somewhere, even now, even today, there is someone walking under the same enormous sky who carries, without knowing where it came from, an old true thing about being given a road when every other door was death. They took me, of course, you will have guessed that. When they finally breached the house and found no squaw, no buck, no baby, only a poor rancher and an empty hole in the floor, and a 100-yard tunnel running off north into the broken country, when they understood all at once and far too late, what the firing had been for, Prout wanted to hang me on the spot from the well sweep, and would have, I think, except that Cobb, tired, careful, decided against Cobb, would not have a man lynched on a feeling, even a true one, even his own. So they took me to Bowie and they charged me, and there was a kind of trial, and a fine I could not pay, so I gave them the colt and 2 seasons beef, and a stretch of months in a cell that I will not pretend were easy. I lost the better part of the ranch. Prout did remember my face. He found reasons over the years. I will not go into it. I would do every hour of it again. I sold what was left of the place in the end and moved to town and grew old, and the railroad came, and the people came, and they look out at the dry washes and the broken hills and they say, empty land, nothing happened here. But I kept the deed to the washbank. I do not know why. I have it still in the drawer with my father's watch. And once, only once, a few years back, when my knees were better than they are now, I drove a hired buggy out to the old place and walked down to the eastern wash to the bank and pushed back 60 years of brush and found the slab of rock and worked it the way I taught her to work it, and it gave, the way it gave for her, and the cold breathed up at me out of the dark, the old cold, older than the territory, older than all our trouble. And I stood at the mouth of my father's road with my hat in my hands, and I will tell you what I have never told anyone, which is that I said his name into the dark, my father's name, and then I said hers, and then I left a thing on the threshold and pulled the brush back over it and drove home. I left dried apples. I do not know if anyone ever found them.